Hi, Gary Alt here with our second in a series of interviews with authors who are ex-JWs or ex any high control group or even perhaps a mental health professional that specializes in helping people of that ilk. And today we have on Kathy Jefford, author of the book Where's Jimmy?
So we have Kathy Jefford, author of Where's Jimmy, her latest book, published, I think, in 2023, I believe,
Actually,
2021, 2 years ago.
October 21.
Okay, good. So tell me just a little bit about your history as an author. This is your first book, I think.
It is my first book.
Okay, but were you into writing when you were in as a JW and you just didn't have anything to write about, or when did you discover that you had a talent for writing?
Well, I was raised as a JW,
Hmm.
and there was no opportunity for writing. And I left in my when I was about 28, 29.
Hmm.
So just my whole life, I just felt like the story of a JW needed to be told.
Hmm.
Um, and when I retired almost 5 years ago, I began writing. And it took me about 3, 4 years to finally get it all down.
Hmm.
So, in my career, though, I worked in healthcare. I mean, I wrote a lot of like manuals and training and how-tos, especially as we move toward electronic technologies. So I was used to that type of writing. But this memoir was very personal and a very difficult thing to write, but
Hmm.
something I felt I needed to get to paper.
Right, right. Did you do it all from memory? Did you find that the memories came back pretty quickly, or what was that like?
Yeah, most of it was from memory because I was never a good journal or diary keeper.
Hmm.
I would always have good intentions, so I had to dig up a bunch of little notebooks that generally when I'd go on vacation, I'd be like, I'm really going to write, and I'd do that for a couple days. And so I did have a few things to jog my memory. Um, but you're right, as I thought about things, more memories surfaced that I kind of pushed back, and I didn't put everything in the book. But I did put some chapters that I would kind of set aside and return to that were more difficult experiences.
Right. And so was it more difficult to recall and actually write about it? Did you have any times when you thought, I just don't really know if I can continue doing this?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would put it aside for a little while and kind of go back and forth um, on whether to do it. And I kept it very personal, very private. I I'm typically a talker and I'm an extrovert and I share everything.
Hmm.
But I didn't have any Well, toward the end, I have one younger sister that read chapters for me as I went along. But she was the only one that I did share this with, on
Hmm.
a personal side.
Did she help you with some ideas, or was it just more, kind of a gung ho kind of thing?
She just kind of supported it.
Right.
She's 5 years younger. I was 18 when I was disfellowshipped, so she was only 13. So, and then I married at 18 and left home, and all that. So, a lot of things she didn't know, um, but she did contribute information that, just little bits of things I didn't really know from her side, still being at home back then. And then throughout our lives, you know, we we were somewhat estranged because I stopped being a witness 41 years ago,
Hmm.
and she only got out about 16 years ago. And
Okay.
so, she's gone through that transition and she's been at different places and we've shared those experiences with each other.
Right. And they're not always, but typically, you can probably almost say always, is a period of time. At least there was with me when I got out, because the way I got out was a little
Mhm.
bit different from other people, where you're not really sure you want to contact any ex-JWs,
Oh,
what's that
yes.
going to be like. So I don't know if that was an experience that you went through with her.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one of the differences, I've probably watched at least a dozen of your YouTube videos recently. And I think because you got in as a teenager, to me, you already had some sense of identity and
Right.
personality. And that was something I never felt I really got to have. I called myself a rigid robot when I did some personal work to become a better person and deprogram,
Hmm.
because I just, felt like we had to act a certain way. And my father was pretty extreme as a witness. I mean,
Right.
he lived and breathed it. So it was very difficult to kind of process all of that.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that aspect of it in a bit. The first thing you mentioned, rigid robot. When you kind of mention that in the book, in the same chapter, you kind of say that you're actually uncomfortable with that,
Yeah,
and so you wanted to kind of get rid of that.
absolutely. I hated that.
Yeah.
Felt like I was an actress, and Meryl Streep's not worried, believe me. But but no, as a child, I felt like I had to act a certain way
Hmm.
and not really how I felt about things. My father wanted us to be stoic. I mean, we weren't supposed to laugh too loud or cry, or he
Hmm.
wanted us to just be unreal, if you will. And so it bottled up so many things. And I wanted to become a real person, even though that meant yeah, I got a lot of joy, but I also faced a lot of heartbreak to finally put that out.
Right. So I did want to talk about your father a little later, but I think it's we might as well talk about it now.
Sure.
Um, I think it's you already mentioned the difference between being raised as a witness and my experience of
Right.
coming in later. And,
Hmm.
I had already decided I didn't want the world anymore. I was kind of tired of the way
Hmm.
people acted. And,
Sure.
it wasn't a big deal for me to go door to door and not celebrate birthdays. I didn't want to do that stuff. Um, so, one of the differences I've always found being out is the different interpretations of what's an absolute rule versus what was just a rule in my house. Your dad was yeah, I don't want to say unusually so because I've seen a lot of this, but he was quite a interpreter
Mhm.
of the witness rules as
Yes.
he saw them, and was
Hmm.
sort of controlling, I guess you would say, right?
Oh, I would say he was extreme, and he was extremely controlling.
Hmm.
I can remember asking him in my teens, because there were so many things that I just felt like I never did anything right. And they'd be like,
Hmm.
okay, it's like list the sins, okay, and list the things that maybe aren't right. It was almost it really almost didn't matter if I didn't sit still in the meeting, or I didn't answer a question, or of course I had to get up and knock on doors. But it was just always felt being punished by him, and never good enough. And that laid a lot of groundwork for, my view of men,
Hmm.
and um, affected my whole life. I mean, because he was so extreme. I mean, he lived and breathed this every day,
Hmm.
and expected us to read everything, quizzed us at dinner. um, don't really remember fun times with my father. My
Yeah.
my sister and I have talked about that recently because we have grandkids, and they'll say, "Well, what'd you guys do when you were young?" And we both just kind of look at each other.
Mm.
We sat in meetings a lot. We read a lot. Uh,
Yeah.
we knocked on a lot of doors, and of course they're looking at us like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and you talk about feeling love versus not
Mhm.
feeling it. When you asked your dad, I forget how you said it. Do you believe in unconditional love, or what's
Yeah,
your
yeah. He said no.
fusion of it? But yeah, how did he answer that basically?
Yeah, he said, no, I don't believe in unconditional love.
Yeah.
It's conditional. You have to love Jehovah. You have to obey everything, and not just the things almost you read from the organization, the society, but even kind of the little things he threw in. And always felt like Jehovah was watching me. He knew what I was thinking. I mean, that's pretty spooky. You and your child, and then you had the magazines and the books with those scary pictures, and you heard the horror stories of Hitler and Malawi, and just things that witnesses were into, and and it was scary.
Hmm.
um I wished I had felt some kind of, I didn't feel safe. And could it be that just that I didn't read the Watchtower and answer in that meeting? How many points did that score that I'm now not a good witness and
Yeah. Yeah.
Jehovah's not happy with me? You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
just nitpick, and berating me
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and that idea of unconditional love, I mean, theoretically, it's okay. So if you believe, if you obey these rules, and
Hmm.
that's, you're showing love for the same person your father shows love for. So there's a little tiny little bit of logic in it, but it
Hmm.
begins with beliefs.
Right,
You have to believe this,
right.
hook, line, and sinker, right? Like straight down the
Oh,
line, or you're not
100%.
going to receive that love. So what if a person just has doubts, and maybe maybe for a period of time, or maybe for the rest of their life, they just decide that, no, I don't really think this is the truth, and I'm not really interested in following it, and maybe you just don't want to even be part of any religion. um, that's really unconditional love,
That's
because or rather conditional love, rather,
conditional. Yeah, that's conditional.
yeah, because because it's not just how you feel, it starts with the beliefs, and if you don't believe it,
Hmm.
why you so you have to believe it just because. Yeah, so which basically means that if you really don't, you have to force yourself to believe it
Hmm.
and to act towards it in a certain way, which is basically not being true to yourself. And yes, it's terrible.
Yeah. In my
Um,
teens, I can remember begging not to go to meetings and not to go
mhm,
out in service. And I didn't believe it. And boy, did I get lambasted. I mean, to the point that, you finally just give up and go along with it. Because I love my family. I have 4 siblings
mhm,
and a lot of kids in the congregation I babysat for. I mean, these were the people, we were in the one congregation. This is everybody I knew. And so I had to just kind of toe the line and learn to keep my mouth shut, which
yeah,
wasn't easy. And even when I, went through to get reinstated, I didn't want to be part of that, but I didn't want to lose my family. And
right,
so I was really conflicted. And finally, it was at the point of after 10 years of marriage and my husband leaving, it was just time to say, I'm just done. I haven't believed this. And I'm not teaching, and my sons were 2 and 4 years old at the time. I did not want them to be part of that. Now, I had taken them to meetings sporadically,
mhm,
but I didn't want them to grow up anything like what I did.
yeah. That concept of which I bought into all the time I was in,
Hmm.
uh, the disfellowshipping arrangement is designed to bring you back. Which again, if you believe it, everything, it's like, well, isn't that a good thing? I mean, wouldn't you want your life to be, a life of worship of Jehovah? It's all good and ifs and that, Of course, it's a big if,
Right.
but the concept there's like a twofold thing happening. You want people, they want people to see the error of their ways in the true sense, and to
Hmm.
come back and live a great life and live into paradise and all this kind of stuff. But there is that forced part. There is that part
Hmm.
that every single member of your family that's a witness really should obey the rule to shun you, because
Hmm.
that's what's going to bring you back. Because the lack of love, or the being cut off from your family, is going to force you to realize how bad you were, and this and that. um, have you ever? I think there are cases where somebody does, if their behavior was extremely bad in any
Hmm.
context, regardless of religion or
Right.
whatever, and they have, maybe come to their senses in a sense. But my sense, now that my main contact is the XJW community,
Hmm.
is that the vast majority of times it doesn't accomplish anything
Yeah.
in terms of, because if you're coming back just
Hmm.
like you did, you're coming back just to have association with your family.
Hmm.
What does that do to make you the better person that you're supposed to become? What do
Right.
you think about that? Do you think that there are, there are, in most, if not all cases, it really accomplishes nothing?
I think it accomplishes a lot of suicides and a lot of
Well,
pain.
yeah,
And yeah,
right,
but
yeah,
no, you're right. I don't see how that makes anyone suddenly believe more or really, really. I think most don't want to come back. And well, it's only been recently, Gary, that I realized I probably was thought of as an apostate in my teens
Hmm.
by my father because I doubted so many things and I questioned so many things. And that word never came up as, when I was a witness. It was never said to me.
Hmm.
But because of the circumstances of being divorced for something I did 2 years prior, and was really just a big mistake, and not for, I think, the reasons that they said. The more I've thought about it, I think they really lied a lot to disfellowship me. And I've also realized that part of that was my father was difficult, not just with his family, but I believe with the elders. He was an elder,
Hmm.
and I think he was difficult. and uh, and to me, once you put your family out there and parade them as this great family and all witnesses, and I think they were out to get him a little bit too. And
Hmm.
so I felt like my being disfellowshipped had a lot to, because what I did, a lot of kids did, and were never disfellowshipped.
Hmm.
So there was, to me, you could pack a lot around that whole thought of why they do this, and it's harsh. I don't see how not giving love makes you really want to come back to that,
Right. Right.
knowing how tenuous it is. I mean, at any time, cut you off. And not just disfellowship, but the idea to disassociate with you and the looks they give you, that you're worthless.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
don't know why people really, I mean, I did it. I got reinstated and I stayed in another 10 years, but really not because I wanted to.
Hmm.
Felt like I had to. This was to have my family. This is what I have to do.
Yeah. If we were smart, I mean, I did this a little bit just before I got out, but if we were really smart, we would have realized, well, I shouldn't say smart because it really doesn't have to do with intelligence, but we would have realized that we need to build a support system outside of the organization so that when we,
Yes,
for a safety net,
yes.
just because, I mean, the way it worked with me was that I already had a certain amount of association through
Hmm.
a radio station where I was a DJ, and I just started tapping into that and expanding my
Hmm.
friends like immediately. So I had like no almost no transition period. I
Hmm.
went right into tons and tons of friends, that I could depend upon. But yeah, it's very true. That I've always said. I mean, even when I was in, I used to say this: you don't make a person feel good by making them feel bad.
Hmm.
It's that simple.
It
And,
is
and
simple.
and that's what they do with the disfellowshipping arrangement. They make you feel like garbage, and they destroy your self-worth, and that's supposed to produce a better person. It's just not. It doesn't even make any logical sense from a physiological human
Mhm.
interpretation of things. Um,
It was crushing. If I could just add real quick,
yeah, go ahead.
because so I'm reinstated, but I'm never embraced fully.
Hmm.
And so my father had said to me, and at that point there were no, I hadn't had children. I have an older sister. There were no, I didn't have any nieces and nephews yet. But he said to me, "You will never be alone with any of my kids or their kids." And that held true.
Hmm.
And I love kids. And,
Hmm.
my nieces and nephews, I wanted to have in my life, but they were kept at arm's length from me. So that lack of love stayed. I mean,
Hmm.
it wasn't just a year of we're not going to love you. That stayed. And that's when I'd been reinstated. I'm going to meetings, I'm knocking on doors. I actually got somebody to come to the Kingdom Hall, a woman,
Hmm.
and thought, okay, they're going to treat me better now. No, they didn't treat
Yeah.
me better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so. And I've kind of seen that even when I was in, there were and the way I looked at it at the time was that because I totally believed everything I was taught,
Mhm.
even though I realized we didn't treat people properly. That was the main beef I had. But I believed that pretty much everything, the reason for disfellowshipping and everything. And I would sometimes observe that someone seems like overly sad, as I
Right.
guess it was Paul that said that, we don't want to be somebody to be overly sad, and and when they finally come back in, you're just wondering, like, why are they doing this? Like, is it for the
Hmm.
right reason, for some goofy reason? And I kind of observed that like years and years and years ago, even when I was still in. Sorry if I keep sipping my tea, it's because I've got honey
Oh,
in
I'm
it.
doing the same thing. Have
Yeah,
my iced tea, keep the caffeine in.
yeah. Well, I'm doing it because I woke up with this with a sort of I think an allergy induced
Oh,
sinus issue. So
it's the season.
I always get some local honey to I don't really like honey that much in my tea, but I do that. So anyway, was there a
Yeah.
time when the beliefs were comforting to you?
Boy, that's a tough one because once they took away Jimmy, I can't.
Well, that was what I was kind of going for.
Yeah.
Is the whole I see Jimmy as a sort of metaphor in the book because
Hmm.
he's not a character that's there from beginning to end. He's
No.
right at the beginning,
Yeah.
and then
And
you
then he's
mentioned him
gone.
at the end. And maybe you could tell me if I've interpreted this correctly. The reason for the title "Where's Jimmy" is because it was like a lifelong search for you to, are these beliefs correct? Like, what should I believe? So in the beginning, you believe that, well, we're going to see Jimmy again in the paradise,
Hmm.
and so that's why I asked: was that at least for a period of time? Was that comforting? Was that something you looked forward to?
It was only comforting for maybe a year
Hmm.
because when he died, of course, I'm 8 years old. He was four. It's in, trying to remember, 1962 or something. 19, that's not right. 61, whenever he died.
Hmm.
But it shortly after that is when they started talking about 1975.
Hmm.
But even before they really pinpointed that date, all I heard all the time was Armageddon's near. It's
Hmm.
soon. It's soon. So I'm thinking, okay, probably next year, Jimmy and I will be playing again. It was then within about a year after his death that his parents stopped, gradually stopped going to meetings, divorced, remarried other people, joined other religions, and that completely took away any comfort or anything in my life. He was gone, and okay, so if you can write off a 4-year-old, an innocent 4-year-old, um, I don't like that,
Hmm.
and I didn't find uh, comfort there. But I struggled. Obviously, okay, well, what if it really is going to happen in 1975? I married in 71. I purposely didn't have children and wanted children.
Hmm.
Um, but that kind of hung over me as this constant, not just, it wasn't really a comfort because I thought, I'm not sure I'm going to get in paradise. So if I'm not, my kids aren't. And those thoughts are way too big of thoughts and scary thoughts
Hmm.
and I'm 18 when I get married. Um, there's no comfort in that. I wanted
Right.
there to be. I wanted to believe. Maybe I was forgiven, but I knew I doubted. I knew I
Hmm.
really didn't believe so many things.
Okay.
When you talked about having a network of friends outside of it, yeah, it was because of work that I could communicate. Had a few
Hmm.
relationships, but not best friends or anything like that. Um, I forgot my thought on that. But no, so it was a struggle.
Hmm.
I just yesterday, and I think this speaks volumes, Gary. My book received an award,
Hmm.
um, and it was for the grief category.
Hmm. Okay. In other words,
Um,
helping people overcome grief.
I think helping him overcome it and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
recognizing it on a really deep soul level.
Okay.
Um,
Now
so yeah,
well, you're mainly talking about the grief of the loss of a person in death, I guess. Am I correct?
no,
No, what kind of
I'm
grief are
talking
you talking
about the
about?
grief of my lost childhood,
Okay.
of my
Okay.
stolen young adulthood.
Okay.
Um, so it's the book is Where's Jimmy? It's a lifetime search for his soul and for myself.
Right.
You
Okay.
know, and so it's um, so there is, and Gary, I've read a lot of uh, new books by former witnesses, who repeating pretty much my story that are
Mm-hmm.
raised in it, which is the one I'm, of course, familiar with. And by and large, we all had our childhood stolen.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, parents might have been as extreme. They could participate maybe in some school activities or hobbies, or, they had some more things going than what we did. But by and large, it's our lost childhoods that we
Right.
grieve,
Right.
because that sets the foundation as we go into adulthood. Um,
Exactly. Now, and you mentioned a good point. To a certain extent, yeah, there is a sameness when you read, different people's story, especially people that are raised in. It's, well, we had to preach and I didn't really want to. We couldn't salute the flag. It was
mhm,
uncomfortable. So that's not a unique story, but it's what's unique about it is the way it affected you, which
mhm,
again is going to be similar to other people,
right.
but what's unique about your story is like first of all the Jimmy metaphor about not just grieving the loss of a young boy, but that your whole childhood and everything. Um,
My
and what
identity. Who
yeah,
am I?
right. Who are you? Right. And a lot of now. See, it's funny because with me, when I left, I wanted people to know that I'm the same Gary. I really am.
Yeah,
There's nothing
yeah.
different. My moral compass, it's pretty much the same thing as it always was. And I wanted the witnesses to know that. I found out that it was kind of a waste of time even bothering to worry
Sure.
about what they think and feel. But and I still feel that way. I'm the same person.
Hmm.
So for me, it wasn't a search for a lost identity because I, we said before, I knew what I was getting into when I was 16 years old, and so there was a lot I had to shed. But what I think what some people experience, and I'm going to ask you if you did. I think I know the answer already, but there's a third kind of grief, and that is a grief when we finally wake up and realize, like, oh my God, this isn't the truth.
Hmm.
Holy mackerel! So now what do I believe? Is Armageddon gonna
Hmm.
get rid of the bad people? And is if that's the way you were looking
Hmm.
at it in a positive way, and is the paradise gone
Hmm.
forever? Like what happens when we die? Um, I have met at conferences and things like that. I have met XJWs that were bawling their eyes out
Hmm.
because
Oh,
because they were like, I was lied to. What do I believe now? Um, so what would you say about that in your particular case?
oh, absolutely. So I left when I was about 28, and I moved from a very small rural community to Columbus, Ohio. And one of the first things I did was know I needed psychological help. And so found a lady finally, and she said, you need deprogrammed. So even from 28 till I'm 35 when I finally do this, those years is exactly what you're saying. I'm struggling. What do I believe?
Hmm.
What what can I teach my children? I mean, I've really struggled that what do I teach them? I don't believe in this Jehovah. I don't
Hmm.
believe in this their belief system.
Hmm.
And it was a process. I mean, it was years of just kind of being, like they talk about being in the wilderness or the desert in the
Hmm.
Bible.
Hmm.
I mean, I had those years of just floundering around. And to this day, I've never joined any church. I
Hmm.
visited a lot. They have a lot. Some of them have some really good beliefs. They do a lot of charity and helpful work for people, and
Hmm.
I admire that. Um, but I can't say that I am Christian. I can't say I'm Jewish. I can't say I'm, Hindu or anything.
Right. I'm sorry, just a message just
Yeah,
came up on
that's
my
right.
screen that
Yeah.
distracted me. Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I find comforting. A lot of people in the XJW community find comforting is that we don't have to go around thinking that we have the truth. We always have the answer. If we don't
Hmm.
have an answer to a particular
No.
question, we'll find it within a day or something like that. It's because that takes away all the discovery, all the things that are
Yes.
about being human that are wonderful. And I'm at a point where I'm comfortable with what I do believe, not
Hmm.
because I'm comfortable. In other words, I don't believe it because it gives me comfort. It's because it makes
Yeah.
sense
Oh.
to me. But there's
Ah.
so much that I don't know about. So what's the difference?
Mhm.
But the other thing that changed in your life, and I'm not really sure exactly when, but you finally remarried,
Hmm.
and it has to do with a trip to Colorado and a yard
Hmm.
sale and a bunch of things that are mentioned in
Oh,
the book. Um, but it's sort of like you denied it, like you just didn't even it was like staring you in the face, and all of a sudden it's like a bell went off.
more like somebody hitting me upside the head.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm divorced at 28. I
Hmm.
remarried at almost 47.
Hmm.
So all those years, I didn't live with anyone, didn't let any guy live with me. I raised my sons.
Hmm.
Yeah, love was like, that was a tough one. We even
Hmm.
dated briefly, and I liked him. We'd been friends. We'd worked together. We were friends, and we dated a while. And I thought, no. And I left and went to Colorado. It was something I'd promised myself. After I raised my kids, boy, that's where I'm going. It's what I always wanted to do. Um, but he kept calling. And I
Hmm.
knew when I came back, and my sons told me, Mom, you should be with him. It's
Right,
like,
right.
hello, wake up. They were grown by then. But
Yeah,
it's hard when you blend families and you have different ideas of how to raise your children. And he had a son who was
right,
a
right.
number of years younger than mine. So, that was kind of where I was with, let's just stay friends.
Yeah,
But, when I came back then, no, I knew this was a good place for me. This was real love.
right.
And how that man puts up with me, I'll never know because I'm
Yeah,
not easy. I'm
yeah.
very difficult. And, to have resurrected now, how many years later, this whole JW thing, um, it's been quite an experience, and I really value his thoughts all the time when something's going on. And what do you think? It's like, what would a real person think that wasn't jaded by their past?
Right, and especially your view of men. I mean, I can only
Oh, oh.
imagine, how it was shaped by, the paternalistic
Mhm,
characteristic of the JW organization in general. How we're supposed to look at the elders and all that, which is something I never quite believed, even though I was an elder. I was always
mhm,
trying to de-emphasize, like,
mhm.
why are somebody supposed to believe everything I say just because I'm an elder? What's that about? But the paternalistic aspect of the organization, but in particular your dad, because he was who he was, So I guess it took a while to get over those effects and to settle down and realize that this is what I need and what I want.
Oh, and I made a lot of bumps on the road. I mean,
Hmm.
there were a couple men I dated and maybe saw 3 or 4 years, but just dated, but made bad choices. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
because you're right. I really had issues with men. I didn't feel my father protected me even as a child. So
Hmm.
that extended on. And then after the disappointment of sitting in front of three elders that I grew up with
Yeah.
and babysat their kids, and why are you doing this to me? I did something 2 years prior, and
Right,
I'm
right.
sorry I did it. Didn't do it, hadn't done it with my husband, my
Hmm.
fiance. Well, wow, that just really tore my trust apart. And then when my husband left, I'm like, whoa, yeah, I didn't much care for men.
Yeah, yeah. And really that it's already a problem. I mean,
Mhm,
what are there 9 billion people on the planet or something like that?
mhm.
And it's already a problem for anybody,
Right.
regardless of religious upbringing, to find a good man, or for that matter, for a
Well,
man
it
to find the
is.
woman that's right for her, for him rather. But it does, yeah, it's another thing altogether when you go through years of
Mhm,
toxicity when it comes to male
mhm.
relationships. And is there anything else you want to talk about with the book, or to say something to the XJW community?
I just hope they find some comfort in it, some humor in it.
Right.
I threw in the murder chapter. Just
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Now, how would they
I
get the
didn't
book?
murder anyone, by the way.
No, no, I knew that already, but I don't want to give away the book. But
No.
but no, there's no murder. You do talk about suicide here and there,
Yeah.
but which is another
Suicide
topic.
was too much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
suicide.
But that I will just say, because we don't want to press the time here.
Yeah.
That there's some very positive views of it in this book, Where's Jimmy, that we encourage everybody to read. But which gets down to the question: how would they get a hold of the book?
It is on Amazon and
Hmm.
it's on. I didn't get it on Barnes and Noble. I can't even think of the other site. And I never heard of the site that your book's on. I wished I had earlier. Um,
I don't remember which one that was.
it was a publisher or
Oh,
someone that
Book Baby.
Book Baby. I'd never heard
BookBaby
of that.
yeah,
Yes.
bookbaby.com. Well, I know that because I've been a member of
Yeah.
CD Baby for decades,
Oh,
and
yeah, I never heard of
they
that.
do the same thing with music, and they came out with Book Baby
Hmm.
just like four or
Yeah.
5 years ago, and they put it out on Amazon and
Hmm.
BarnesandNoble.com, when it comes to books, there aren't that many sites really, but is there going to be an audiobook or
I've
is it
thought
an
about
ebook?
it. I thought about it. You know what I really want to do, Gary? Before I wrote this book, before I sent it to be published, I approached so many psychologists. I wanted them to go chapter by chapter on the mental health effects of a child in my life and
Hmm.
my, where I was kind of the lost, but
Hmm.
um, and I still toy with the idea that there needs to, and I love Bonnie Simon.
Hmm.
And I just think there needs to be something that actually, okay, so here's this 8-year old, with this little boy that died, but she's going to see him in paradise. Yoo-hoo, right? And then a year later, nope, 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 Jehovah's not going to remember him because his
Hmm.
parents. I mean, I kind of want something, not just my book, but for all of us. And recently, a woman who was briefly was a JW until she was about 20, ended up, she's, I believe, in her 40s or 50 now. She just did a dissertation on the effects of children and on the effects of adults that were raised as children
Hmm.
as a witness. And there's a lot to unpack in that to understand. And um, the book Hoax that
Hmm.
Barbara Anderson, you guys,
Hmm.
that's very powerful when she discloses her mental health issues. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg there
Hmm.
because there's a lot that needs to be, I think, presented in maybe a story, but a simpler way for us XJWs to process.
Right, right. I agree. Well, it's been a pleasure. There's a whole lot more we can talk about, but that's why we want people to read the book. We don't want to talk about it
Yes,
too much,
there you
because
go.
it's also an ebook, I think, right?
It's if you're on Kindle Unlimited with Amazon, it's free.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Good.
then yeah,
Okay.
so it's there.
All right. So we thank you so much for your time,
Thank you,
Kathy,
Gary.
and thank you for writing a wonderful book. And we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
If you are an author, or if you know of an author who has written anything at all related to the X cult experience, the X high control group experience, whether it's from the standpoint of having been in one, particularly an XJW, or some sort of a mental health professional or life coach that has even just written blogs, just anything that you think is helpful, please contact me by either leaving a comment where you saw this video, or you can look me up on Facebook, or you can go to openpathlifecoach.com, openpathlifecoach.com, and my contact information is on there, so you can drop me a line. And I'm also, I think this is the first time I'm announcing this. I've been in contact with a gentleman by the name of Scott Holman, who is very much into the music community, the XJW music community. It has done a lot of work in that area. And I'm a musician primarily. I'm not mainly an author and a life coach. I've been a musician for my entire life, and that's what my primary interest is going to be. So I'm going to expand this series to include musicians, songwriters, performers, whether instrumentalists or vocalists, anything to do with the music industry. And I'll even take it a step further. Anybody that's done a film, even a short film or a long film, whatever it is, what we want to do is we want to highlight what ex high control group people are doing with their lives, and specifically people that have to do with any kind of artistic endeavor. Um, Not to put them above, I'm not into the Hollywood idea of like all these people are wonderful and they're so above us average people. That's not what it's about. But it's just because typically these people already kind of have a, a niche in the um, idea of kind of carrying on with their life in an artistic way that can help people. You know, maybe a songwriter has written things that are encouraging or what have you. So if you're any of those kind of people, an author, a musician, a filmmaker, even any kind of visual arts, I'm not sure how I would work that in, but even if you're a painter or whatever, we want to highlight that what you're doing with your life and how you're finding that to be helpful to you and to others. So thanks again for watching. Bye bye.